Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Frontierland with me, Dean Allen. I've got a very, very interesting man on the show tonight, but before I bring him in, we've got to talk about the Rugby World Cup, which has just started. A lot of you are glued to your screens, I'm sure, and we had a first victory for the Springboks against a very tough Scottish side. But let's hope we're going to bring that trophy home like we did in 2019 against my home country. A lot of people ask me, who do I support? But back then in 2019, I made up my mind. I'm a Springbok supporter. I live here in South Africa, and it feels like I've got the green and gold in my heart. So I'm a truly converted South African. But do you know the secret to South Africa's victory against the Scots? We've actually got a secret agent up there in Edinburgh. I came across this wonderful footage of a Scotsman, a so-called Scotsman, playing our national anthem. Just have a look at this.
I've been crying and how about that? You're recording it. Money is boss.
Wonderful stuff. How could we not fail to win with that kind of encouragement? Amazing. Have you ever heard the South African national anthem played on the bagpipes? A few dodgy notes there, but apparently one of the most difficult instruments to play. So absolutely fantastic stuff. Right, to tonight's show. As you know, I'm very much involved in the world of conservation in terms of my writing. Tonight, we've got a man who is really hands-on in the world of animal welfare, animal protection. I can't wait for you to meet Arnold Slabbert, and we're going to bring him on now.
Ooh, welcome to the show. Now it's your time to shine. We're going to have a lekker chat tonight. Another good time.
Arnold, what a pleasure to meet you at last. Do you know you're a bit of a legend? Gary, who sits to my right here and controls all this wonderful technology, ever since we started Frontierland, has said, you've got to get a man called Arnold Slabbert on the show. So you're not going to disappoint me tonight, are you? You've got lots of stories to tell.
I'll try and behave myself, I promise.
Try and behave yourself. That's the main thing. We met yesterday. I've got to say to the viewers, we met yesterday. I wanted to get a sense of not only what you do, but a sense of your appreciation for this wonderful part of the world that we live in, of course, the Eastern Cape. This show is called Frontierland. I believe you're intimately part of the frontier. You've got some quite interesting relatives. Tell us a little bit more about those famous relatives of yours that we were discussing.
Which one, my uncle? Yeah, well, my great-grandfather was a reasonably famous frontiersman, Jack Bissett, and he wrote an amazing book called Sport and War. Extremely interesting read, and I've always loved history and reading, so I'm pretty well read up, and I must say Jack Bissett's book just opened the world for me on the frontier wars, and that changed my whole idea on a lot of the things and the way we thought and what went on, and it gave me an idea of how hard life actually was on this frontier at one time for those English settlers and Scottish settlers, etc., and even German settlers later that came out. And what a hard time they had of it, and how amazing that some of them actually made it through, prospered, and tamed this wild part of the country.
Certainly, it still is a wild part of the country. I mean, it was back in those days. The interesting thing that we were talking about earlier was this idea of conservation, but understanding the dynamic of the land. And before we go into that too much, I understand that book by Bissett gave you an idea that they started to appreciate the environment in which they're in the longer they were here.
You know, it was very interesting to me because you could see that somewhere along the line, someone started to say, listen, we can't carry on the way we're carrying on. The way we're carrying on was very much the colonial way of just slaughtering everything. You know, I mean, one of the saddest stories I read in that book was, I think it was Jack Bissett, Walter Curry, and Queen Victoria's son, Prince Albert. I think Prince Albert. And they went hunting elephant in the Knysna forest. And the weapons they had were not suitable to actually kill an elephant. But, you know, they still, the one bull, he writes here, they had about 40 shots at him and eventually retreated back into the forest. But later on, they go, a couple of years later, so they go on a big hunting spree in the Free State. And although he mentions that they shot vast amounts of game, he's also at pains to mention that nothing was wasted and everything was given to the local people to eat, which is a big change from his attitude previous in the book. So even by then, they started to realize that this is not infinite. You know, you've got to do something here, and you can't just kill everything you see for the joy of killing it, and you can't waste as well, which is very important because it was start of a better ethic as far as utilization of natural resource. And that is that if you're going to use something, if you're going to kill something, use it. Don't just kill it for sport and just leave it lying there. You know, so yeah, it definitely, you can see that change, and I mean that change has come through over years now, and there's a more mature attitude towards utilization of natural resource. But it was just interesting to see in that book, even in the middle to late 1800s, they already accepted that they needed to change their attitude.
Tell me a little bit about you growing up in this part of the world. I mean, how did this fascination with nature and animals? You've got an incredible story that we're going to talk about tonight, but how did it all start?
You know, it was very interesting. I always wondered where I came from. So, genetics, you know. So, I had an amazing fascination with the veld and wildlife and that. And I was fortunate to grow up in an era when most of your family were on farms or farmed on that. So I was always out in the veld doing all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And I remember I used to get to my grandfather's farm and I would be gone the whole day. And I'd spend my time with the Xhosa kids and collect all manner of creatures. I was also a really naughty little bugger because I can remember we used to go down in the evening to go and fish on the river. And everyone would come, mother, father, grandfather, uncles who were there, family was there. And it was this narrow, windy path down to the river. And I would always run ahead. And there'd be these wasp nests. And I would whistle past them and whack the branches of the wasp nest on. I'd be gone 200-300 meters away and I'd hear the wailing behind me. Of course, they couldn't get the culprit, but they got the others walking casually along. People would come back, bailing through the bush, getting the hailstorm. But that was just part of the course. But, you know, it was very interesting. So I grew up in this family. My grandfather was quite interesting because even though he farmed, he didn't believe that. In fact, he was very strict in that if you killed anything, you had to eat it. So if you killed a little bird, you ate it. Otherwise, you were in trouble. And I can always remember the bushbuck grazing right up to the house. I can remember the boomslangs and snakes in that round the house. And the old man would just say, listen, just skirt around them. They'll leave you alone. And that was because it always stuck with me. But even at that early age, and I mean, I hate to say early age because it makes you realize that you're actually getting on in years now. You know, you're not as young as you used to be. Sometimes I need to remember that. But the point of the matter is it was there that taught me an appreciation that, you know, you don't have to kill everything. You can coexist to a large degree. You know, and over the years I developed, let's call it an appreciation for wildlife, indigenous wildlife, in our area. And the reason I say that is because we only grew up with indigenous wildlife. We didn't have this vast array of creatures that now occurs right throughout the province. I mean, there were a few species of game animals, and that was it. Now you get 30, 40, 50 different species. Yeah, the big five wandering quite a few areas. That was never like that in our day. The only place you'd have the bigger animals would be in national parks and reserves, and that wasn't like it is today. And when I look at the change in attitude, the other thing that was really, really interesting too is back in that day, people were very much utilizers. And when I say utilizers, the farming communities and the people actually lived off the land. They didn't go and buy their stuff. In hunting season, and hunting season traditionally is always in the winter months. In hunting season, people would hunt and all of that meat would be utilized. And the reason was in the winter months because it was colder. So, not necessarily because animals weren't breeding or that. Some species will breed in winter, but it was just because it's colder and you can preserve your meat better. And all of that stuff was utilized. And there was a definite respect for the land that I've seen, unfortunately, disappear. And it's disappeared with the massive farming enterprise, which are no longer family-run businesses. These are just massive corporations grinding out the rands and cents and not really that much concern. And I was talking to someone this morning. I said, I really, really miss those days. And the other sad thing too is the massive corporate ownership of land nowadays. So you get all these foreign companies coming in, these foreigners, and they're buying up vast tracts of land. And basically, because of the financial strength of the currency, they are pushing a lot of younger farmers out of farming because they simply cannot afford to buy. They need to grow, but they can't afford to buy the land because you can't farm that value out of the land. So you see this whole change in land use. We can debate, and I think you and I have spoken about it. What has the game farming industry done? Like I said, when I grew up, there were very few species. Trophy hunting was virtually something nobody ever spoke about because it was rarely done. There were maybe a few guys that potentially brought in foreigners to hunt them, but it wasn't done. It was a more a friendship thing, and the farmers would all get together and they'd have a hunt on a Saturday morning in the hunting season, and the meat would be shared with everybody. And that whole thing has disappeared into the money culture. And I remember my days in conservation. One of the things that always stuck with me, the first thing is you shouldn't have children because there's just way too many people in this world. Take note. But the other thing that really stuck with me was that if it pays, it stays. And that is really a mercenary attitude to life. But it seems to be the attitude that does conserve. Because people immediately they get financial resource out of something, then they tend to look after it better. And if I go and I look today, the things that are critically endangered and really need to be protected are the tiny little things. They've got no value. They're not cute. They're not entertaining. They're just there and they're on the edge of existence. But because they have no real big financial value, there they sit and there they disappear.
But they're also a big part of this thing we call the ecosystem. I mean, scientists, ecologists will tell you from the smallest insect, it's all about supporting life. It's this matrix, isn't it? I mean, the more I read about conservation, you've got to take this holistic view. Otherwise, you just can't have the big five roaming without any support system around them, because then it's artificial. It's not sustainable.
There's a gentleman. He is a really good wildlife manager. A lot of people hate him. He's very outspoken. He's very brash, and that's Ron Thompson. And funny enough, in my early conservation days, I read a book written by him called On Conservation. And Ron had a really interesting view about life. And he likened, he's probably one of the most experienced elephant managers out in heaven forbid. I know he shot 10 or 12,000 elephants in his time in Zimbabwe parks. But he did it because it was a job that needed to be done, because of the damage elephants cause to vegetation. But anyway, the interesting thing is he said that because as the human population grows, habitat gets less and less. And we have to accept that some of the bigger species, like the dinosaurs, will eventually disappear because they cannot be sustained, because there's just less and less habitat for them. And that is where it is extremely interesting, because it's a whole thing of maybe the big ones just can't survive. And he looked at it very pragmatically, and I looked at it and I often thought about it, because you need these vast areas to actually sustain elephant. We're not talking about the artificial little game ranch with a high fence around the 5 elephant in it. We're talking about real maintenance of elephant herds, and that's why the Addo National Park has expanded so. But whether you like it or not, and one of the things that struck me on the whole conservation thing is that there's a new airy-fairiness about conservation. In the old days, conservationists were actually practical people. They worked in the field, they knew what was going on in the field, but the new airy-fairy style of conservation is around meetings and, people actually don't even get into the field anymore. They actually don't know what's going on there. And then you get all these airy-fairies coming in. I read a really fascinating thing on the Kruger National Park. So I've got a lot of friends who work in all the different environmental circles. And one of my friends just said that the Kruger is actually really, really bad. They've lost control on it badly. And he's a researcher there. And he just said, the guys come and they poison the whole water hole. And they poison to kill rhino, obviously for the horn and that, but they poison vultures left, right, and center. And everything just gets poisoned in that whole area. And a far more harder than an inclusive policy is needed there, because there's a very liberal policy of allowing a lot of access to the park, and they actually need to control that access more. But anyway, I drifted off there because what I was reading in this article, there's a new scientist coming to the Kruger Park, and with glowing terms, they spoke about this guy. He had long hair, he had 3 earrings in his ear, bloody, bloody, blah, what an amazing guy. And he said, listen, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this management in the park, which is like farm style management of culling and controlling elephants and things. We're going to stop that immediately. I looked at it and I thought, practically, I wonder how many days the guy's actually been in the field. And I was fortunate in my younger years, I was able to spend time with a lot of people who actually practically had to manage really big herds of elephant. And they just said, listen, when an elephant's been through an area, it's like a desert. A big bull will come and he'll see a 300-year-old tree. Oh, I like that branch to the top, and tear the whole tree down, take the branch. But that's his job. But his job was then to move on and maybe come back 100 years later. Or another elephant comes, not every 5 days, to come through the same area and destroy everything. So when you look at those kinds of things, you start to ask yourself, where is the whole bigger conservation picture going? Are we going the right way? Or should we start to accept, that unless humans, which doesn't seem likely, do something about the uncontrolled population growth? And let's face it, it's really, really uncontrolled. Probably the most exciting thing in my life was when, remember when the Wuhan flu game started?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the most exciting thing. I said, this is it, boys. Tea time's over. This world's coming back under control. Well, it didn't work. It was just a big thing, and virtually nobody died, and life carried on as normal.
David Attenborough made this point in his, seminal work later in life. He said how he went around the world in the 70s, 80s, just enjoying life, thinking it was going to go on forever. He said he took the best out of that period, modern period. But the point he made was, we do live in a vastly overpopulated world. Of course, we haven't had any major wars or anything like that, if you look at things that have balanced things in the past. But the idea of conservation in a natural state, we are in an exciting time here in the Eastern Cape, because I've spoken to people during my research and they said this is one of the few areas, this province and this part of Southern Africa, where perhaps we can drop fences and allow animals to migrate naturally again. So in other words, they will then deal with their own population as nature would do. There won't be this idea of surplus population, because they would then move. Carnivores would move where the food is, and those herbivores would then move away from overgrazed areas. Do you see that happening, and will that cure everything?
When I look at the human species is a greedy species. He doesn't want his asset to go on to the neighbor, and vice versa. You can just see that with something like kudu. I mean, for heaven's sake, the guy slaughtered the kudu because he's worried, it's going to jump over the fence, be in the neighbor's falcon, he's going to kill it, so I'm going to kill it first, kind of attitude. And that is pretty much a human attitude. Your biggest problem is to get enough people to agree to a certain, and it is happening. I mean, there are conservancies and inverted commas and that, but you've got to also start looking. The first thing is, a lot of people have no basic idea of conservation. You go and talk to game farmers and they think we're practicing conservation, we put animals here, etc., etc. Yeah, there are species that have really thrived now, but a lot of those species are exotic. They don't actually belong here. They bring their own negative impacts on our environment, and they compete with our indigenous species. So when you look at a situation like that, what are we talking about? Okay, so now we're going to have, who are the big free roamers? Springbuck. Okay, so springbuck roam freely forever. So practically, if you want springbuck to roam the way they did, you're going to have to open stock fences for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. That's not going to happen because you do have a lot of game farmers, but you also have a lot of stock farmers who definitely don't want their fences open. So your springbuck is not a jumper, so he's going to try and creep under a fence. So to open up for spring, they're good open. Kudu are a nice example because they just jump fences. They don't care. You've really got to have a nice high game fence, otherwise Kudu goes over. And they move around freely. And the interesting thing is that there, if you look at the genetics in the open veld, I'm not talking about the game fence veld, far better because those kudu have got fresh genes coming. The game fence areas, a lot of those kudu are stagnant. They're stuck inside those relatively small areas. They never move out of them. The only way they're getting fresh blood is to buy some fresh kudu in, put them in, or even worse, and it's been one of the big things, is they bring Transvaal genetics down here. And you put Transvaal kudu in, the Transvaal kudu get out and destroy the genetics of kudu that have evolved to this area forever and a day in the hopes of producing bigger animals with bigger horns for the trophy market.
You knew Jack Ski, didn't you? Or knew of him, the man that basically wrote the template for what was here originally. And do you believe then that we should only have the indigenous animals? And if so, do they all belong back here in a state of increased population, human-animal conflict? It's changed since perhaps even the records that he refers to, isn't it?
Well, Jack Ski was an amazing man. The reason he was an amazing man is he was a self-taught man. He lived in an era where you still had access to people who remembered previous eras, and he could physically talk to them, and they would tell him things that they either saw or their father saw. And that was so fascinating about him. He was very good at literature search, and he had a passion for what occurred. And not only in that, in history as well. Have you read his books on the prehistory of the... Fantastic. So, when you look at what Jack Skeet said, yes, I believe that the species that should occur here should be the species that originally occurred here. It's not for us to bring in all of these. I mean, we've got Lechwe from the Botswana roaming freely in the Eastern Cape. In a lot of cases, feral population. We've got Inyala from Natal roaming freely, feral population. Impala are everywhere. And then you have giraffe, things like that. And why is that there? Is it a conservation purpose? For conservation purposes or purely financial purposes? And that's what it is there for. It's purely financial. So my thing is, you ask me. So as a conservationist, I would say we need to accept the game farming, game ranching is agriculture. It's not conservation. It is agriculture, because if you were going to practice conservation according to the true concept of conservation, you sure as hell wouldn't have giraffe and 38 species roaming on your 2,000 hectares, right? My big issue is that with all farming, there is a big clash between the farmer, be it stock farmer or game farmer, and predators, right? And most of them will not accept any form of predation. And it was very interesting because, my big passion is birds of prey, and the martial eagle numbers have just plummeted. They are critically endangered and deservedly so. Not only are they contending with wind farms and that, it's persecution by stock farmers. But my thing originally always was, okay, Arnold, marshals and crowns are going to be safe. With all the game farming, they are not a threat to game farmers. It's small stock farmers who regard them as a threat. And there's a very interesting conservation thing I'll tell you about now. So what happened is I was up in Natal, and one of my friends is a researcher, and he was doing his doctorate, and he was researching on game farms and that. And we were talking. And I said to him, my only hope is that some of the big eagle, but it's particularly martial, populations will recover a bit with all game farming. He looked at me and he said, "Are you crazy?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Listen," he said, "these game farmers, right, they've got a black impala lamb there. That black impala, that was the time when all of these game variants were selling through the roof. That black impala ram's worth 100K. Do you think he wants a marshal to catch?" He said, "They persecute the marshals harder than the stock farmers do." And with that, I just felt that little bubble burst. I thought, geez, right. And then a friend of mine, there was a well-known crowned eagle nest site on the farm. And I said to him, I said, "What happened to the crowned eagle nest? Why are you so quiet?" Because he always used to report back and say, "Oh, no, the birds are breeding." He said, "No," he said, the farmer has trophy hunters there who shoot blue duiker. So he shot the crowned eagles because crowned eagles catch a lot of blue duiker. So
no doubt if that eagle was also hunted, God forbid, that would have had a price on it, it probably would have been preserved. That's the irony of the situation. You're saying you put a price on an animal, it gets looked after.
You put a price on an animal, gets looked after, and that is the sad thing with predators. And I've always stood for the predators because I got a very good friend who's a real capitalist, and he got some farms on that, and he said to me, "What do I think?" And I said, we did a lot of research. It was really fascinating research. You know what we found? That in the natural areas, and it makes such good sense, in the natural areas, your predators prey on small prey items, jackal, lynx, lots of striped field mouse, that kind of stuff. Why? Because you have such a well-managed ecosystem. You've got lots of insects, you've got lots of good grass, you've got lots of seed. So these animals are plentiful and they present no threat to that predator. Catching a bushbuck, or there's a threat to that. But catching field mouse all day long, they're high protein, really valuable. And we showed immediately that, in well-protected, well-preserved, well-maintained veld, these animals live mainly on mice, and lynx mainly rock oryx. And I told him this, and he listened to me. And funny enough, he just said, "Right, okay, I'm farming sheep, but I'll take my 1 or 2 losses, but we're not hunting lynx and jackal here." And he runs a big farming operation. They don't hunt lynx and jackal; they just leave them alone. And the situation stabilized itself, and he's also gone and got people to advise him on better management of his veld. So he's got good grass cover, he's got lots of things, he manages his veld well, and the whole situation balances itself out. In my conservation days, whenever a farmer complained, "Oh, the eagles are killing all my stock," you knew when you went to that farm, it was overgrazed 99% of the time. Right? And the worst of the lot is those farmers never realized that if your kids came home every holiday, went out at night with a light and shot every single hare in the district and spent every day shooting all the dashes and the crowns, what do you want the eagles to feed on? And then to add insult to injury, you've grazed the veld to hell, there's no real natural quarry. And the sad thing with birds of prey is once they've learned to do something, it's basically habituation to quarry. Right? So I can take a peregrine falcon and train it to hunt ducks exclusively. It learns, it gets success on ducks, and it hunts ducks. Right. The same with the big eagle. After a while, they learn, okay, these lambs are easy to take. They'll teach the youngsters. This is the quarry to take. And while the chick is still in the nest, with all birds of prey, they're bringing food back and can teach them like that. However, if they hunt a nice, balanced, and a wide variety of quarry, that chick grows up used to eating rock hyraxes and a whole lot of other things. Heaven forbid small antelope, because some game farmer is going to clap him because he's taking a trophy away. So I look at the game farming industry and the whole tourism industry, and I see it as a commercial venture. I see it as farming. I don't see it as a conservation industry. If you're going to have a true conservation industry, there's no ways you can have hordes of vehicles. I think the Kruger National Park's experiencing exactly the same problem. You have these hordes of tourists racing up and down and interfering with the lives of those animals. Basically, day in, day out, people up and down. Yeah, they get used to them to a degree, but it interferes with the way they operate. So to have real conservation areas, they've got to be massive wilderness areas. Wilderness areas where people go in on foot, not drive up and down with vehicles.
That was what Ian Player said, of course. That was his big drive, that these reserves that did have and do have commercial value, of course, had that wilderness area where the only access was by foot, preferably no human access at all. Unfortunately, as we said, due to the lack of space, those areas have dwindled. Well, let's see. We'll perhaps have this conversation in 5 years' time, and let's see if we're any way forward, because the people I meet do have hope for a time when we will start dropping fences, perhaps between amiable neighbours, but that surely is the way to go with this, isn't it?
If I look at it, I would say, if you said to me your personal experience in that, I would say we need vast protected areas. We need better farmers that farm to make money, yes, but manage the environment better, that are more environmentally aware. One of the big issues for me also, going to the other side of the coin, is the fact that a lot of commercial farmers are extremely environmentally unaware. and the bottom dollar is the bottom dollar. They really don't give a damn, and particularly in the crop farming industries, and that it is frightening what happens in those industries. You know, the sheer amount of toxins and poisons. I see yesterday there was a march in the Western Cape of farm workers, and you can't blame them because, I mean, they're exposed to these chemicals day in, day out, you know, and I mean, you really can't blame them, and this stuff is really toxic. So we've got to hope that we have situations like that, and the game farming industry belongs with the farming community. It is part of farming. It's not a conservation industry. It's a farming industry. And I've heard some of the big game farmers, and they will agree with me and say this is a farm and it should be treated as farming. You know, it's not. It's just farming wildlife. I mean, you know, when you manage wildlife populations in natural areas, it's a world apart from managing wildlife populations on closed game farms, privately owned game farms. And so where I see the future is better farming and bigger wilderness areas, real wilderness areas. And those wilderness areas have to interlink, be it by partnership with private people, like you said, you know, amiable private people. But, you know, as a person who's dealt with people his whole life long, I have a very negative, because I know the human race, and very few humans do anything unless they benefit out of it. So your big problem with all of this is, you know, that same friend of mine I'm talking about, he put eland on his farm. He put eland on his farm knowing that they would spread throughout the district and hoping that in time they could manage the eland herd to the benefit of the whole community. Let me tell you one thing, the community shot the shit out of those eland. There's bugger all eland because that is the way it goes. So, you know, it is just one of those examples from you. It's very, very difficult. But the real future in conservation is going to be massive wilderness areas. We're far away from humans where we're not getting that human pressure all the time.
We are the problem, it seems. And I get the sense, and I'm probably not wrong here, that you prefer animals to humans. You certainly prefer birds of prey to humans. And a lot of people tuning in tonight, I'm sure, will have been following you on social media. We have got something else in common, apart from our love of the Eastern Cape and the natural world. We've both had a viral video on social media. The subject of mine was my little 8-month-old crawling along a beach, but your videos are pretty popular, and I've been following you for quite a while now. And Gary, can we just see some clips now of what you do? Because you really are a hands-on animal person. It's not a case of talking the talk, you walk the walk. Let's have a look, Gary.
I think just if I will contextualize before we start playing.
Okay. So in terms of what you do practically, what do you obviously you theorize about conservation, you're very passionate about it, but you also manage problem animals. That's something that you're probably well known for.
What I do for a living is I manage problem animals. So a lot of the big corporations and parastatals will call me and say, right, we've got a problem with this. So I look at the problem and say, right, how are we going to solve this problem? And what are the species involved? Now, there's certain species, exotic and indigenous, which are invasive, whether we like it or not. And those species need to be controlled because they have a very negative impact on other indigenous species. And then there's some species where you say, no, you need to find a way around this. You know? And then I will look and I will find a solution. So, okay, if we do things like this, if we don't do this here, if we do that there, we can do it. We can get away with it, and you know, we can actually get it to work. So in a lot of instances, I would try not to get my hands bloody. I'm not shy to get my hands bloody. If things need to be done and things need to be controlled, then you know, it's got to be done. And I mean, I learned that from my conservation days. If there's a problem, it needs to be sorted out. And, you know, we cannot sit with vast, uncontrolled feral animals roaming the wilds and killing wildlife. That we can't sit with. And that is just where I draw a straight line. There's no such thing as that. You can't have uncontrolled dogs, uncontrolled feral cats wandering in our natural areas, spreading disease and killing wildlife. It doesn't work like that for me. However, I'm also very well aware that we sit with a massive population of really poor people. Poor people who are forgotten by the government in power, poor people who are forgotten by the people that are supposed to look after them. And, you know, when I look at the vast amount of the poor and I look at the way up the natural resources on that side, it's sometimes very hard because I know in my heart of hearts, if I was sitting where they're sitting, my attitude towards the environment would be totally different. And it does show. But I think you and I discussed on that if you want to go into the thing on conservation legislation.
Of course, yeah.
So if we look at conservation legislation is basically written for the wealthy. It's not for the poor man on the street. There is no access to natural resource for the poor. And that is why the poor feels nothing about natural resource, because he hasn't got that access. He can't afford to go into some fancy park with a whole lot of tourists and look at things. He hasn't got that. He needs food. He needs to survive. And how he gets his food, be it by planting it, by hunting it, whatever, he needs that food, or he needs to chop wood to sell, or he needs to collect medicinal plants to sell. And unfortunately, conservation legislation makes no place for the poor. It's a very airy-fairy. It protects the wealthy game farmer, it protects this and protects that, but the base level, those millions, the masses, are not included in the big conservation picture. And we already knew 30 plus years ago, if you did conservation studies, what was drummed into your head? If the people on the outside don't believe what's going on the inside, you're wasting your time. And that is where we're failing hands down. The people on the outside, the masses on the outside, do not have the luxury of believing in what's going on the inside. And in time to come, if there's a French Revolution type situation, the whole conservation thing will just fall by the wayside. And it will, because people need to eat. And if you've got a massive hungry population, you're sitting with a high fence, and on the other side is all of this food, you're not going to stop them going.
So it's community engagement, which we've seen increasingly. It's actually where a lot of the funding gets put. But that's obviously a narrative from above that's driven this.
You see, you've got to look at a very big picture, because when you start talking about all of the stuff, there's a hell of a lot of pie in the sky. So let's look at the pie in the sky. The tourism industry produces so many jobs, blah, 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 and it does this and does that. Let me tell you, a lot of the tourism industry never ever filters down to base level. Contrary to what they're saying, and we can extrapolate data, we can fiddle and make things look rosy, but it doesn't. It really doesn't. It's again a very select industry, right? And it caters to the upper class. The basic man in the street is not getting a benefit from it. Average Joe Soap is not getting benefit from the tourism industry. Yeah, we can be clever and try and put in side benefits in that, but it doesn't really occur. And in fact, what I've seen with a lot of the game farming things, if I look at a commercial farm, 10 families employed. It's like using it a thumb sucker. 10 families employed, they live on that farm, they have housing, they get food, they get whatever, most of them with electricity now, they have access to wood, etc., etc. And yes, they don't have a lot of ready cash, but they have a very comfortable lifestyle. Now what happens is farm sold to game farm. First thing, those 10 families are tossed off, they invariably end up in a township. Right. What do? A lot of them have a very low standard of education. Right. They starve in those townships. They absolutely starve there. And a lot of them hate that city life because they've grown up for generations on these farms, and now they're put there. Right. Are they getting re-employed in those farms? No ways. They just sit and rot. I can show you the townships that come on areas where these people come from and how they come from these massive conservation areas, and there they're sitting and there they're rotting. The problem is they then become a problem for the people that live adjacent. The farmers that try and farm adjacent, they just see a massive escalation in crop theft, stock theft, whatever, because these people only know one thing to live off the felt. There's not work in the city in the first place, even for the well-educated, much less so for the peasant off the land kind of thing. So I don't see that, the game farming tourism industry is providing this massive job surge. And I think that in a lot of instances, it has actually been negative. And particularly where you're having foreign land ownership, they're very much inclined. The first thing they want to know is nobody's on the land. When they take that land over, nobody must be there. And people do all kinds of things, and these people are pushed off, and they never, ever get back onto that land again. So I do feel very strongly about that. Just from a personal point of view, I do not agree with foreign land ownership. I think that South African land belongs to South Africans. It comes
down to the fact that the people you're talking about, the locals, albeit the farmers, people from this area, they understand the dynamic, they understand the environment. So therefore, it's a bit like the animals. They protect their environment as opposed to someone else coming in who doesn't and takes what they need from it.
Or tries to take as much as they possibly can.
Yeah. Okay. Let's have a bit of a relief now, because this is important stuff we're talking about now. But I want to show some of the videos that inspired me when we started talking yesterday as well, because people who follow you, Arnold, will know that you're a hands-on animal person. So the animal releases we're going to see now, they're all part of your day-to-day work, isn't it? I mean, it's
okay. So most of the animal releases you see, that's where people make a mistake. Everyone loves saying, "Oh, Arnold, you've got a lovely job." That's not my job. This is what I do for fun. This is people phone me, "Oh, I've got a problem with this," or "There's something stuck in here." That, and birds of prey. In fact, wildlife I do for a passion, because I really love, and I feel like I do for the disenfranchised, the poor that are sitting there struggling to survive. I feel the same, because wildlife's in that same situation, particularly in the peri-urban areas and the urban areas and the small holding areas. They're under constant threat. They're under constant threat from humans, from their pets, their dogs, their cats. And also they're under constant threat because the one thing that aggravates me is people will say, "Oh, I want to go live in the country." They want to go live in the country, but when the country comes to visit them, they want it gone. You know, so you sit with a situation, yeah, a little auntie, and she's got 10 little chickens there, and woe betide, here comes a rattle, an otter or something in, and he sorts out chickens. And then it's like Satan himself is let loose, and this creature needs to be removed permanently from society, whatever. And that always breaks my heart, because when you move into the country, you should say, listen, if I'm going to be a commercial farmer, it's one thing, but if I'm going to be a smallholder, you know, I need to have a little bit of give and take here. And unfortunately, the guys that I hammered, predators.
Yeah.
The predators are the ones that I hammered.
Yeah, come on in, Gary. Let's have a look at some of these. I want to see you in action.
Porkies. We have in the drought, we've had a lot of porcupines in town. Right. And yeah, I mean, you don't want to tangle with a porky. He's definitely not the kind of creature you want reversing back. That lynx was extremely interesting.
Wow.
A caracal.
He was ready to go, wasn't he?
Yeah. And that's an owl that was stuck in a truck engine. Broken wing. Our good vet, Dr. Matt, sorted it out, and it's been released already. I didn't think, actually, that bird would make it, but it did.
Incredible. Is it young one? Young bird?
No, adult.
Adult.
Obviously got caught in the grill of the truck. Truck must have flown into the truck. Oh, there's my favorite. Oh, what a lovely old girl.
Come on.
Crown eagle. She tried to catch an assistant on a truck.
Wow.
You see, that's always the constant reminder, you know. Poison, poison, poison.
So where does this bird originate from?
Sacred ibis. Yeah, you see, the problem is they come from the river systems and that, and with the
at least the
fact that our sewage plants and they don't work, our river systems and wetlands are badly polluted, and that is just so classic. That's just.
And you see this increasingly with the poisoning of animals.
Oh, there's that old bag getting a wing fixed. Oh yeah, this is also classic. You know, this poor kudu cow was chased by dogs, and she took refuge in the Swartkops River. It was a really nice rescue because things worked out really well. We were able to herd her back and push her back up into the veld. Yeah, you know, back to that life where you know that she's under constant threat, but at least she was safe and made her way back.
Wow. And that was domestic dogs, hunting dogs?
Yeah, hunting dogs. People hunting with dogs.
We've seen that area.
The ones I love to hate, the Egyptian geese. They have just thrived and thrived, too much so because they have a very negative impact on other creatures.
Oh, and this dear little thing.
Oh, yeah. He's having a good time. Like Jackie was saying earlier. Oh, no snake. Oh, you know, that was just, thanks for saving me. Let me give you a bite as well now on the road after that one. Shame. Car victim. Yeah, a lot of owls get hit by cars. A lot of interesting science behind that.
And would that owl be released again? Here we see lovely Jackie doing a good job here. This is your partner in crime. Look at that, wonderful.
This was really nice. This kind of gives you hope for the future. That's Motherwell, and that is a young secretary bird. They've been trapped in the churchyard, obviously struggling to find food, and that was really great. The community really came together. I was very proud of them because they watched that bird. They made sure it was safe. They called me. Amazing rescue, great bunch of people in a very impoverished part of town. You know, great stuff. And the secretary bird was thin as a rake, but it survived and was released again. Rung and released. I was very chuffed. That was a very, very good story.
And
very
this is all part of the education. Look at those kids
It is.
watching on. I mean, do you try to engage?
Yes,
with the
I
people?
engaged them and I told them and chatted with them.
And there we are.
Oh,
They're fantastic. They're snake hunters, aren't they?
snakes, mice, anything.
Incredible.
Basically anything.
Do they-
Hares.
Yeah.
Yeah, they catch hares. You know, the first secretary bird I had, I was just absolutely amazed. They're like very casual characters, but that foot of theirs is amazing. And you know, one day I walked in, I turned my back on the bird and it kicked me down my back that it split my t-shirt open.
Wow.
That bird would walk up to a rabbit, it would look at it and think, oh, nothing's going to happen. And it'd just pick up one foot and go clink on the back of the head and the rabbit is dead. Dead. So they use those feet extremely well and critically endangered. And I can tell you now why they're critically endangered. You know, they occur in good grassland. And those chicks get killed by dogs. By us, when I look at birds, I look over 30 years. So I know the animals that come in. And I can tell you that every year I will get 2 or 3 martial eagles and 3 or 4 secretary birds. Now, maybe a marshal every 4 years, secretary bird about the same. And that is because if I go to the nest sites and the areas where they're nesting, as those chicks hatch, unfortunately, the secretary birds on the ground and they get caught by the dogs because they can't fly yet as fledglings. So yeah, and secretary birds really deserve our protection. I heard a horrific story about a wind farm, which goes to show you which why I'm very negative to a large degree about a lot of science in that, because they were doing research there and the woman just came to me, oh no, yeah, well, there's a pair of secretary birds here, and you know, the first one was brought in, chopped in half, and about 2 days later, another one came in, chopped in half. I listened to that, but so dispassionate. And you know, if it was me, I would have been livid, absolutely livid. And no, you know, it's just one of those things. Well, it just happens, you know, it just got chopped in half, so that's the way it is. But marshals are suffering because of persecution, very much persecuted by stock farmers and game farmers too, you know. And like I said, I think the crown's also going to take a pounding because crowns eat a lot of game. And that's their natural food. I heard a horrific story the other day. A friend of mine phoned me. We were talking about it. Oh, no. I said, hey, what happened to that black sparrow nest? So he said, no, those birds aren't breeding anymore. I said, why? He said, no, he said, the farmer shot them. I said, why did he shoot them? No, he likes the plovers and the duckops and the small birds around his house and the black sparrows catch them. And I said, well, what do you want them to catch? You want them to go to Kentucky and order a rounder or something? You know, it's just, I don't understand the whole people-predator relationship. You know, it's just, if something eats something, then it becomes public enemy number one. And, you know, people don't wail when it gets killed.
You're very much, Arnold, if I may say, you're a student of the natural world, and for you, it's all about balance. If you damage one part of the ecosystem, it has an effect somewhere else. Doing my background reading on your work, you have a saying, and you said it to me off air as well. You believe in animal welfare rather than animal rights. Can you explain that? What's the difference? Because that's something we often get confused with, don't we?
Okay, so when I look at animal welfare, to me, animal welfare is being concerned about the welfare of animals. In other words, if we were domestic animals, let's take a dog, for example. You make sure the dog's fed properly, it's got water, it's got a decent place to stay, it gets regular exercise, etc., etc. That is animal welfare. Animal rights is trying to convince yourself that the dog has the same feelings as a human. You know, so when you look at the natural world is a really brutal place. Just watch a pack of Cape hunting dogs running next to a wildebeest and ripping its guts and its entrails out, and it drags behind, and they rip pieces of meat off the animal till it dies from blood loss and eat it. There's no Walt Disney. And I always say that the greatest disservice humanity ever did was Walt Disney movies, because we had the idea of little deer crying and that kind of stuff. There's nothing there. And one of my favorite things is how animal rights has pushed its way into everything, is this whole story. Oh, it mates for life. What a load of hogwash. If anything made it for life, it would become extinct. You know, you can watch all these creatures that mate for life. They lose a mate, next week they got the next one. And if they really like the girls, maybe in 2 days later they got the next girl hanging around. You know, it doesn't work like that. Nothing in life works like that. But it's all of this kind of emotion that is wrongfully put into the natural world. And it has a negative impact. Like I said, like this long-haired getus, no, we'll stop culling elephants. You know, it's not the kind of practical situation we find ourselves in today. Today, we have messed this world up. If we as humans don't take responsibility and sort the problems out, let me give you an example of the Egyptian geese. 30 years ago, there was barely Egyptian goose in town. There were barely rock pigeons in town. What happened is, because they adapt to live around humans, they moved in. There were no crows in town. Pied crows started to move in. White-necked ravens started to move in. These are all symptoms of our interference in the natural world. So what is so bad about Egyptian geese? Well, Egyptian geese don't tolerate other waterfowl on where they breed. So they're extremely aggressive. They're known to kill other smaller ducks. But more importantly, they're cavity nesters. So they breed up in trees and that. So what do? Half of my owl nest sites, I've got to wage a continuous war to keep the Egyptian geese out because they're always trying to get in. They kick the owls out. They kick the chicks out because they're a big aggressive bird and they take over. So they interfere with the whole dynamic and they just get more and more. Whereas before we didn't have any. Now North End Lake's got a flock of probably 600-700 birds. There are thousands and thousands of geese and they're just breeding and breeding and breeding. Then you have the crow situation. Why do we have such a big crow population? Failure in sanitation. Crows live on human waste. What is the negative? They harass everything else in the area. More importantly, and it's a very interesting fact, and having been to a lot of vulture restaurants, I can kind of agree with it. Crows actually stop the vultures from feeding because they come in such massive flocks to those restaurants. And in a lot of areas, the vultures are forced to push off. They just can't take the constant mobbing by the crows. You know, and if you look in the urban areas, also have a constant battle because not so much the pied crow, but the white-necked raven is a really big bird. And they hammer a lot of the nest boxes and stuff because they're much bigger than those birds and they hammer them until they move out and they then take over. And, you know, then you go to things like seagulls. So if you look at gulls all over the world, they become a menace. And the reason they become a menace, why? Failure in sanitation, human waste. So what are you going to do to control that menace? Are you going to leave it? Right? Or are you going to be like, you know, my good friend Dr. Matt, the vet, told me he was at Cape Recife and he watched a gull kill a tern. In San Francisco, I think they said that 40% of young terns are eaten by gulls. Are you going to let all those species disappear? Right? For the sake of saying, oh, shame, these poor girls, we shouldn't harm them, they're cute, they're entertaining, maybe they cry when they die, they mate for life, whatever. No, they have to be controlled and people have to take responsibility. But the problem is caused by us. We need to take responsibility to sort the problem out. We can't keep evading and saying, oh, no, shame, I love all creatures. It doesn't work like that. We have to look at what's better for the bigger picture. And sometimes what's better for the bigger picture means getting, or at least bringing numbers down to controllable levels. And I have a lot of theory on gulls and the damage that they cause to other coastal birds. Because, you know, one of the sites I work on, we started off, there were no gulls breeding there. Now we're sitting with, I think at last count, I got 1,500 gulls there. They got a secure breeding place and they're just breeding and breeding. So that coastline never, ever had that amount of gulls. Now they're there. What is going to happen to a lot of birds and other species that are now breeding on that coast with that massive gull population looking for food?
It's all caused by us, isn't it? Ultimately?
It's all caused by us. But the problem is we evade responsibility.
Yeah. When it suits us, we like to humanize the problem. And
there we go. We humanize the problem. We give little tears running down their cheeks.
What about the cats?
Which cat?
The cats, your domestic cats.
Well, you see, that's another problem. I mean, people say, oh, look at that man, he hates cats. Bull dust. I probably look after more cats than 99% of cat lovers do. That's absolute rubbish. I keep them in a cattery, though. They don't get out. They don't go wander the neighborhoods. You know, it's amazing. Cat gets out, slaughters wildlife. Oh, no, he's just doing what a cat is. Look at my little tiger hunting. Right? Cat gets out, slaughters wildlife. Dog kills cat. Oh, how can a dog's just doing what he does as well, killing cats. So, you know, when you look at those situations, we need to, and cats are a major problem. They're a massive problem. And the problem is, like, we deal with some of the indigenous wildcats. Around our cities and that, you will not find pure African wildcat. They're all hybridized. And the worst of the lot is these cats take snuffles, they take feline aids, and they take it into the cat world, the wildcat world. So when we get small spotted cats, right, which are top species, which are threatened, you know, the small spotted cat. Yeah. Most of them have got feline aids or they've got snuffles.
From domesticated
cats. spreading into them. The African wildcat, aside from all of that, is just so hybridized with domesticated cats. It's only in the really wild areas that you can find genetically pure African wildcat. And again, now you come to all of this, and I mean, I have to deal with these things all the time. I look at these creatures, and it breaks my heart because I think, you are so innocent in this war. You really are. You are the innocent ones. That poor cat living in the gutter, that poor cat there. But we have to make hard decisions. What is better? Is it great for a cat to live in a factory? Is it great for it to live in a gutter with all the filth and then try to, I know, but I throw 5 cat pellets out, so it's good. That's not a good life. Those things need to be euthanized. The vast uncontrolled dog populations need to be euthanized. They need to be controlled. We cannot keep on going, feeding and keeping and looking after all these things. Right? The natural world is under enough pressure without all of this excess pressure from feral stroke domestic animals. We don't need that. And it doesn't matter what you feel. You've got to be practical.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's not a person here who's going to tell me, oh no, I've looked after these creatures. I've looked after thousands and thousands of creatures in my time. And it's not that I don't have compassion, but I see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture says to me, we've caused the problem. We need to take the right steps. Be they be seen as brutal, but we need to take the right steps to try and address, manage those problems.
But we can see on the footage. I mean, you're an animal lover. I mean, you're doing this because of the bigger picture, aren't you? I mean, it must be difficult for you to go to a situation and just think, well, if I'm going to release this animal, it's going to happen again and again. That's the difficult.
You release an owl. We've had owls back 3 or 4 times poisoned again.
Amazing.
And why? If you look at the whole use of poison, the very people that use poison will be sitting there saying, oh, you shouldn't hunt, you shouldn't kill creatures. Toss poison in the roof. Oh, no, but I put poison in the roof, it won't affect anything else. Meanwhile, that rat that's poisoned in the roof, out he goes, gets caught by an owl, the owl gets poisoned, and so the cycle goes on. Poisoning gardens, etc., etc. That's a small microcosm of what occurs in the big world. Then you come to massive commercial agriculture, the vast use of poisons which end up in our river systems. The Mississippi Delta has a dead zone that extends to sea. I don't want to lie, but I think it's about, you see, because I'm always muddled up between miles and kilometers,
Yeah.
but I think it's about 140 miles to sea where there's no life. And if you look at aerial photographs, that sea is green and dead, and that is from all the organophosphates plus tons of other poison that come down the Mississippi River into the sea. It's killed every living thing there. Yeah? And that is why we go to the old thing of, okay, so people love being self-righteous. We all love being, oh no, I'm just better than the next one. So then you'll have this whole thing, oh, I'm a vegan. I don't believe in harming anything. For God's sake, people, go and have a look at the cost of growing vegetables, the cost to the environment. It is staggering. It is frightening, the amount of chemicals that get pushed into and probably do far more damage than that poor old cow, who I feel incredibly sorry for ending up at the abattoirs, but it doesn't matter. Whatever humans do, we have this massive effect on the environment, and it is very, very difficult to negate. And I mean, I watch all the environmental stuff. I keep myself up to date, and I'll even look at recycling, and I look at how fake the whole recycling thing is. I mean, they get all this recycling stuff, go and dump it in some other country, and there it sits.
I can see you're very critical, you're very cynical of this because you look beyond what we're fed in the media and on a daily basis. Give me some good news stories. What is working in this world? Give me examples of how we have made things better, or the practices, perhaps a context, or perhaps with a species or a country that is doing a good job.
You look at the world throughout, and all the good jobs are negated by just sheerly human population, because you can do as good a job as you want, but if you're not controlling your population, and Africa has some amazing stories, but on the negative side, it's just got this massive amount of people, and the environment cannot handle it. But I did hear some really good stories. I think it was Rwanda. Someone said they went to visit Rwanda, and they said that place was amazing. It was so clean. There was no plastic. There was nothing there. And that just blew my mind. Wow. And they said, yes, you really need to go and look there. It's amazing.
I've heard this. In fact, they have a day a week where people go out and they must clean their area, and it's education, isn't it? I mean, we just look at what we do certainly in South Africa, how we really do spoil our own environment. Not just away from us, but our own doorstep. I mean, again, it comes down to what's important. The vast majority of people in this country are looking for their next meal. That's more important.
That's what we were discussing. And the problem is that in a lot of ways, the next meal comes from the environment. So you look at another big picture. So out of our threatened ecosystems, flays, wetlands, our river systems, and that, they are so badly polluted. And with the whole collapse of infrastructure, what you're getting is raw sewage being pumped into most of our river systems, which is why you see things like that ibis busy dying from poisoning and that, because you can imagine all the chemicals that go into those rivers and wetlands and flays and that. The sad thing is that wetlands are capable of producing so much food. And if you look at a wetland like the Swartkops wetland, that is right next to a vast area of poor people. Had those wetlands been managed more effectively, you've got this mess, because wetlands are nurseries. You have this massive potential for production of food. Okay, fish, whatever. But you've got really, and a lot of people do actually subsist off the river. What they catch in the river, heaven forbid, because I would never eat a fish out the Swartkops River. I'm afraid the pollutant is just too bad. In fact, I don't even know, where a person can really eat fish from, because it's bad. The interesting thing, though, is that unfortunately, because of civilization and all the advances and all of the plastics in that, once you start getting into places like the Transkei and that, they are beautiful to die for river systems. But we sit with this plastic pollution problem, because plastics and plastic bags are so easily obtainable. And unfortunately, what do people do? They just throw them down. And that is the big thing. But, it is very interesting, because I think one of the big issues is that if you do not manage your cities correctly, the environment's going to pay. And that is probably the greatest problem we have in our whole country, is the correct management of cities and urban areas and that. And also the correct management of river systems. Because I've heard stories that Department of Water Affairs officials won't go into certain areas because they're too scared to go there because of being threatened by farmers and that. Obviously, to do water sampling and water testing and that. In a lot of cases, they're just ineffectual. They just don't do anything anyway. But I mean, in some areas, I've heard that they've been threatened. You don't go into that, you're not going to come there. And I always remember, and I think I did speak about it when I spoke on the show before, but it's a very interesting thing to me. I was down in the Western Cape training dogs, walking along, same good friend, and I saw canola fields that had just been planted. And I looked there, and there was this lovely blue sheen on the ground. And the story will stay with me forever, because it's just deserved of telling time and time again. And I looked and I said, hey, what's this stuff? So my friend, the capitalist, knew immediately. He said, that's snailbait. I said, Jesus, hundreds and hundreds of hectares of snailbait on the ground. So I said to him, this can't be good. And he says, no, well, snails like canola. It's a cabbage type plant. So this is what they do. Anyway, so I walked down, and I've noticed over the last couple of years, you can see the diminishing a lot of different species, and there were just millions and millions of dead millipedes, centipedes, all kinds of things on the edge of the land. We get into the cliff where there's a bit of natural vegetation, and you don't see bat-eared foxes. All of a sudden, you start to think. Now I like analyzing and thinking about these things, and I've always done look at the natural. Okay, why did that happen? I need to know why. Okay, now the bat-eared foxes are gone. So we have a good look at that, and being a very good investigator, I took water samples straight away. Kept the water samples. So then I approached one of the farmers, and he told it to he mentioned to an agricultural scientist that I've been scratching around. This guy attacked me and vilified me and said, how dumb can you be? This snailbait is harmless, it just breaks down, etc., etc. So I got these samples, and this is where you learn about giant pharma. So now I wanted the water tested. No laboratory would test it. Then I heard about, no, we're not going to test that. No, we can't do that. Finally, my good friend Dr. Matt and I got a laboratory in the Western Cape who were prepared to give us the results without putting their name to it. So we got the results, and it was something like 70 times the safe for human level of metaldehyde in the water. So, you look at that, and then lo and behold, I'm at the local co-op, And of course, I watch all the pesticides and that coming because I know exactly how the pesticide industry is like a mafia in its own. They all have their pet scientists, paid for scientists, and all kinds of things. And there's a lot of really underhand stuff that goes on, stuff being brought into the country legally, it's banned in the rest of the world, etc., which is one of the reasons why they had that march. So I looked at the stuff on the back of this truck, and it was a big truck. And I said, "What's this?" "No, it's snowbait." So where's it going? "No, it's going to the citrus orchards. They also have a problem with snails." So they just lace the whole ground in those orchards with snowbait.
Yeah.
That's it. Where do you think it ends up? In the river system, the Gamtus, the Sundays, etc. Where does it end up? In the sea.
Ultimately, we're going to screw ourselves, aren't we, when you think about
We're
it?
busy,
This is our
busy
food
doing
source,
our best
isn't
at
it?
it.
This is our food source. This is the chain of life, as we call it.
Yeah. The problem is we are just too arrogant. And I always, when I give talks, it's my favorite analogy. But I always say to people, I call it the doom mentality. Come into your house, there's some flies circling around the light. What do? Grab a can of doom. Instant gratification, they fall dead. Never once do you come in and say, well, maybe my waste management is not up to standard. I need to clean up. I need to take that black bag, put it outside. Never once do you say, I'm actually spraying a neurotoxin in the air. Yeah, I'm absorbing it. My kids are absorbing it. I don't have any kids, but your kids will absorb it. Cats, etc., etc. Dogs, animals, fish. We don't say that. We don't even think about that because we are taught to get instant gratification from pharma. We are never, ever taught to think, which is why the Wuhan flu scam works so well.
Yeah.
Because we're not taught to think and analyze and look at data and say, well, this is impossible. It can't work like that. This is how it works. We don't. We just accept the word. And, I've got a whole lot of old adverts. And the one that I love, and I'll mention 1,000 times, it's an advert, one of those typical 1950s type, a lady with a polka dot dress and she's doing a fancy pose and that. And the top of the advert says, DDT is good for you. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where we are in the world, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So sometimes you realize that there are so few that actually stand up, and the problem is it's far easier to be a conformist than to be a non-conformist and stand up and say, listen, this is not right. We need to change the way we do things, or otherwise we're on this downward path. And people do like the good news. They'd much rather hear the good news and all the laughing and the joking. They don't want to hear the critical analysis of where we're going.
No, very much so. And I hope everybody who's been watching this evening, it's certainly thought-provoking, that's for sure. And I hope as people consume this in the weeks and the months to come, because this will be sitting on the internet, they'll take a lot of notice of what you've been saying, Arnold. And I can see why Gary was so keen for me to have this chat with you, because you've certainly opened up my mind. And it's not a case of being negative, because you're not a negative person. It's a case of being a realist, isn't it? I mean, what you're saying, it makes common sense. I mean, it does make sense, because it's that instant gratification, as you said. And as humans, we're probably one of the only species that does actually spoil our own environment, and that is to our own detriment at the end of the day.
Like I say, it's a very, very hard thing to practically manage the natural world, and to manage it with the goal in mind of managing it for the natural world's sake, not for human sake.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it doesn't make you popular. It doesn't mean you don't have to strive to be popular in this world. You have to strive to be that one voice of reason that stands in and says, listen, people, we're on the wrong road here. We need to change. And we really do need to change. And I've said it for a long time. Humans really need to change how we view our world and the world. And not only our world, but the people around us. Yeah,
definitely. Let's finish up with some more good news, Gary, of this man saving some wildlife. I think that it's inspirational. What beautiful
spotted-necked otter. First time this has been found this far in the Eastern Cape, which is why rehabilitation is so much fun. Oh, there he is, Charlie boy. Jack, Charlie boy. Look at Charlie boy.
Now released into the wild?
He will go. The thing is drought. One of the big issues has always been drought.
You release them when it suits, and there's your big passion, of course, the
birds of prey.
Birds of prey. Okay. Beautiful creatures. How did he get in there?
Where was? Oh yeah, trapped in a garage. That was Camel Park.
Wow, look at that.
Oh no, that was no winner. That Bumblefoot. Still
What
don't know why that bird was in such a bad way. Black Sparrow Hawk.
Okay, beautiful.
And my idea on it is that somebody kept it legally.
So you get called out to all these different incidents. You've got to go there with an open mind, prepared to do what you can for these animals.
A liquid
And sometimes, of course, you've got, well, a lot of the time, you've got to make a tough decision, haven't you?
Oh yeah, you've got to make tough decisions the whole time. Some of the times are entertaining. Some of the times are just damn dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, you get to deal with a lot of dangerous wild animals who are not the friendliest of the friendly.
And they're in distress, of course, in this
Yeah.
particular case.
convulsion start.
What kind of owl is that?
Spotted eagle owl.
Beautiful.
Oh, who was that? Oh, there we go. Grey Diker.
In the felt, I know you got a few holes.
That's a nice one.
This is what makes it worthwhile, isn't it? When you
Oh
actually
yeah.
do this.
You know what the most worthwhile thing is? I think Jackie will agree with me. Is when the animals get up and run away.
Yeah.
That's the most worthwhile thing. His back leg was sore. He got his injection. We treated him, but he was hit by a car, and we treated him well. So he should be fine. Oh, there's an old boomslang. I must remind me. I think I should end this with the tail of the boomslang.
Oh, please.
You're going to get the tail of the boomslang.
My wife will enjoy that. She loves snakes.
Here it goes. My friendly old boomslang. Oh, there. That had to be the biggest clown known to man. Look at Jackie smiling. She knows that one well. Oh my God, that was the command performer of night.
Okay.
Juvenile heron. Mongooses.
And I mean, look at the range of species you deal with.
Oh,
I mean, do you do it by? I mean, you're self-taught, aren't you? I mean, you just know how to.
No, I can't
handle
wait.
animals.
There's a nice fish eagle going to go. That was a nice one.
Where's this being released?
Organophosphate poisoning. That's the port of Nucha.
Okay. Wow. look
That
at
bird couldn't fly when we got it in. Jeez, it was full of lice. Huh.
Wow.
Still feel those lice running on me.
Oh,
There it
look at the
goes.
people there watching as well.
Yeah. Flamingo.
Now we recognise that backdrop, that's for sure.
Port of Nucha.
Yeah.
There are lots of flamingo there. Port of Nucha is actually quite a nice story. Provided a lot of safe environment for a lot of waterfowl, seabirds. Quite nice. Oh! Polecat. Striped polecat. There's an otter. There's an otter.
Beautiful creature that is.
Oh, they mean. Oh, they love to bite.
Yeah.
They
you
use
wanna get
any
anyone
excuse to
near it.
bite.
So come on then, let's end with your boomslang story.
So I tell them the boomslang story, and they smiles. It's a time when I saved my soul with whiskey, good quality whiskey.
Yeah.
Right, so I get phoned about 10 times by the mayor's office. There is a large snake in a school in Motherwell. Now, you know, there are a lot of snake catchers in town, but you know when it's in the impoverished areas, nobody really wants to go. And I get phoned, I just busy and I didn't read it. And I know it's going to be an afternoon. Anyway, gets to the point where I said, let me go and catch that damn snake. I get to the school. There's a line of, what do you call those things? Port Jackson willows. Port Jackson willows are not the greatest trees to climb. In the top of the Port Jackson willows is a big male boomslang, but he's been chased the whole day. I kid you not, there are chairs hanging in the trees.
Oh.
There's even bricks strapped in the branches of the trees. So I climb up beautifully, I corner him in the one corner, and I catch him. All's going well, absolutely perfect. I'm busy bagging him. And as I'm bagging him, Port Jacksons are just notoriously brittle. They are the crappiest trees to climb. They break for nothing. I just feel branches start to break. I let
How high are you
go
at this stage?
about 5 meters up.
Okay, high enough.
High enough, yeah, to really hurt. You know, I kind of forget I'm not 21 anymore. Anyway, so in that instant, without thinking, I automatically release my grip to grab to steady myself. As I do that, he bites me. Now, you know, I laugh because social media breeds its own special kind. Now, you have thousands of experts on social media and that. And, you know, it's a very old story. If you haven't been bitten by snakes, you haven't caught many. And I've caught snakes my whole 50 years now. It's a long time to catch snakes. You know, anyway, so I got me a good shot. So I decided, no, bugger this. If I'm going to go, it's not a bad way to go. So I thought, okay, no medical help for me. What I'm going to do is I went and looked at some stuff I wanted to buy. I released the snake, bagged him nicely, released him, said our fond farewells, and I went and looked at some stuff I wanted to buy, drove around, went and saw some friends and stuff, had a whiskey with a good friend, and that was it. I went home. So for about 3 or 4 days, I wasn't too good. I had really bloody, swollen eyes and a few things like that. After about the 4th day, I was fine.
Just took a risk. What? You took more of a risk doing that than going to one of our wonderful hospitals?
No, I just didn't feel like do you know the honest truth? I don't think I haven't seen a doctor I can't tell you when. Okay, I lie because I do have to have medicals. But aside from that, going to actually physically go and see a doctor, I haven't seen one in 20 or 30 years. Haven't been to hospital or anything like that.
Brilliant.
So
it was obviously good whiskey. I think that's what did it.
It was damn good whiskey. Yeah. It was the real expensive
Have you
stuff.
drunk enough? Because it could have been your last.
Well, I thought, do it and go out with a bang.
Well, Arnold, it's been an absolute pleasure tonight. I can see why Gary certainly wanted you to come on and we could chat. Perhaps we'll do this again. Well, like I said, we'll invite you back in a year or two and let's hope there's been some kind of movement in Nelson Mandela Bay, which we're all passionate about, of course. And thank you for what you do.
Pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers.